Cult films on video. One of the strangest films in recent years seems to be renting strongly around the country, and its title is Eraserhead. This was the first work by David Lynch, who went on to make Elephant Man, Dune, and the controversial new film Blue Velvet. Eraserhead is weirder than all three of those films put together. It takes place in a world that maybe looks a little like ours. It has things like steam radiators in it anyway. But apparently this is a different universe, a different world, and it stars John Nance as a frightened man who lives in that world of shadows and evil moments, threats and bizarre visions. To give you an idea of the film style, here's the scene where he goes to his girlfriend's house for dinner.
Do I just cut them up like regular chickens?
Sure, just cut them up like regular chickens.
There's something really unsettling about the way that tiny little chicken is still alive on the plate, but that's nothing compared to the central scenes in this movie, where the hero and his girlfriend give birth to some kind of lizard monster that cries for the rest of the film until the gruesome ending, after which it doesn't cry anymore. The best thing about Eraserhead is the way it creates an absolutely original, threatening universe. Nothing in this movie seems reassuring or familiar. But one note, by the way, because I watched it just in the last couple of days on video, the movie is shot in a lot of darkness and shadows, and it's hard to see some of the details, if you watch it on video, details that would be clear in a movie theater.
I didn't like the film when it came out. I still don't like it. I'm trying to figure out what is the appeal of it. First of all, it's very confusing to follow, but I'm trying to think that it is more of the college-age crowd that is embracing this film, and maybe they feel so alienated by the world around them that all the threats that are involved in this guy are all the kind of subconscious and sometimes conscious threats that they feel themselves. This, I mean, they don't identify with this guy as much as they identify with what is coming at him.
I'll tell you what it reminds me of. This film reminds me of a film made 55 years ago called L'Âge d'Or by Salvador Dali and Louis Buñuel, one of the great masterpieces of surrealism. Both films have very disgusting images shot in a very crude way, in a very surrealistic way. And in the 60s, I think it might have been called A Bad Trip. Sometimes people want to go on one. It just makes them feel kind of creepy, and that's maybe what they're looking for.
Okay.
That was John Hurt as the Elephant Man, a freak of nature with the soul of a poet. And the Elephant Man is one of 5 new movies we'll be reviewing this week on Sneak Previews. Across the aisle from me is Gene Siskel, film critic of the Chicago Tribune.
And this is Roger Ebert, film critic of the Chicago Sun-Times. Now, lately, Roger and I have been agreeing on virtually every movie we've been discussing. This show will be different.
You can say that again.
Okay. In addition to The Elephant Man, about which we disagree, for example,
let's move on.
I'll step up in quality with the story of The Elephant Man. It's been told in books, a successful play, now a movie. It's based on the true story of John Merrick, a hideously deformed young man who lived in Victorian England and was made an attraction in a traveling freak show until he came under the care of a London doctor. The doctor took pity on Merrick, gave him a permanent home, and encouraged the flowering of his intelligence and sensitivity. But John Merrick, the so-called Elephant Man, died at the age of 27. It's a heartbreaking story and never more moving than when the doctor, played by Anthony Hopkins, first interviews John Merrick in the hospital. The movie is filmed in black and white.
First, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Would that be all right? Your owner tells me, I mean, the man who looks after you tells me that you're English and that your name is John Merrick. John Merrick, is that right? I tell you what, I think I'll ask you a question, and you shake your head like this for... have you always been the way you are now? Are you in any pain? Are your parents still alive? Do you understand me? Your father, your mother, are they dead?
Freddie, what are you doing for...
At first, Hopkins' interest in Merrick is purely scientific as he presents his patient to his fellow doctors.
Note, if you will, the extreme enlargement of the skull, the right upper limb, which is totally useless, the alarming curvature of the spine. And would you turn around, please?
Turn around, please.
The looseness of the skin and the varying fibrous tumors that cover 90% of the body. And there is every indication that these afflictions have been in existence and have progressed rapidly since birth. The patient also suffers from chronic bronchitis. As an interesting side note, in spite of the aforementioned anomalies, the patient's genitals remain entirely intact and unaffected. Thank you.
One of the issues the movie raises is whether or not the doctor is merely exploiting John Merrick, similar to the way the Freak Show had. By taking Merrick under his care, the doctor did make himself famous, and he encouraged many upper-class Londoners to meet Merrick. The head nurse at the hospital confronts Hopkins directly with that charge that he is exploiting his patient.
Mr. Mother said I don't think you should have any more visitors today, and I have to lecture at the college, so I'll be back this evening.
Excuse me, sir, but if you have time, I would like a word with you.
I'm rather late. What is it?
Well, sir, I don't quite understand why it is you allow that sort of people in there.
Why? Because he enjoys it, and I think it's very good for him.
Yes, but, sir, you saw the expression on their faces. They didn't hide their disgust. They don't care anything about John. They only want to impress their friends.
I think you're being rather harsh on them, don't you, Mrs. Motherson?
I beg your pardon, sir.
You yourself hardly showed much loving kindness when you first arrived, did you?
I bathed him. I fed him and I cleaned up after him, didn't I? Yes. And I see that my nurses do the same.
Yes.
And if loving kindness can be called care and practical concern, then I did show him loving kindness, and I am not ashamed to admit it.
I didn't mean it exactly that way, Mrs. Motherson. Now, please believe me. Now, of course I appreciate your concern. I appreciate everything that you've done for Mr. Merrick.
Thank you.
But I am the physician in charge, and I must do what I think is best for him. Please, now, I'm also very late.
If you ask my opinion, he's only being stared at all over again.
Thank you.
Right about now, I think a lot of people probably watching the show are wondering, hey, when are we going to get to see what the Elephant Man really looks like? Well, sorry, but the film's distributor, Paramount Pictures, would not release a scene of the Elephant Man without that bag over his misshapen head. Their gimmick is obvious. You have to pay $4 to see him, which for me, maybe you agree with this, it puts the film company, I think, in the same position as the owner of a freak show. That aside, I want to state that I did enjoy The Elephant Man, that I was moved very much by its story. What's so good about it for me is the performance under the grotesque mask by actor John Hurt. We see his sad eyes behind those deformities, and we know there's a person there, a person trapped by something he cannot change.
Well, this is not a bad film, but I can't quite endorse it. I think there are a couple of issues. One of them you brought up, this business of 100 years after Merrick's death, the sideshow still goes on. To some degree, this movie hopes to succeed at the box office because of our perhaps unworthy curiosity about what the Elephant Man really looks like.
All right, but let's not blame the film for it. It's the film company's fault. What's your other objection?
Well, okay, I have another objection. That is, what is this relationship between Merrick and the doctor? We're told in this movie we're invited to feel that Merrick was very courageous, very noble. Why? Well, maybe one reason is, despite his handicaps, he learned to function in society. Maybe that's a reason. In the movie, you don't get that. The movie starts out with him snuffling. He can't talk. He can't say anything. Later on, the 23rd Psalm, Romeo and Juliet. Where did he learn to speak like this? How was he brought along? I would have been fascinated by scenes showing the doctor-patient relationship, these two people learning to communicate. But no, instead of that, we get a lot of sensationalism.
Well, I think what you have to assume from that is that the guy was simply traumatized, knew the stuff early. You're right, it's not clear on that point, but Roger, I think that's a small point compared to the big point of the film, for me, which was how we react to people who are radically different than us, to freaks, what we think is freaks. Sometimes people can't relate to people who are uglier, that they think uglier, or lower class than they are. This film had the same reaction for me that at the end of Close Encounters of the Third Kind, when we see the alien creature, and I felt how sad it was that we couldn't communicate with alien creatures. I felt the same way with this film. How sad it is that someone who is radically different from us, we cut them off, we shut them off, we eradicate them.
I think that what you're doing, though, is bringing a good idea to the film that isn't necessarily there. I kept asking...
I only got it when I saw the picture.
What is this film trying to say about the Elephant Man? Well, it starts out by showing his mother, I don't know, raped by elephants, attacked by elephants, dreaming about elephants.
The beginning...
His disease has nothing to do with elephants. Then at the end, it shows him as kind of a star child, 2001 style. I don't know what that means
You're
either.
only
and
bringing
all
up
during
small
the film,
points.
he has all of this stuff about the Victorian Industrial Revolution. We see sweatshops, smokestacks, and so forth. None of it has anything to do with the life of the Elephant Man.
I can't deny the little things that you're mentioning. I think what you are missing, unfortunately, the little things got in the way of. I think what you're missing, the big picture. That's why I like the film.
Well, okay, I couldn't find the big picture in this film, so we disagree.
We're back to disagreeing on The Elephant Man. Roger thought the film was badly confused in its motives. I found a terribly sad story about society's outcasts and the way people shut themselves off from other people.
So 4 disagreements out of 5, but I think of the 5 movies on the show, the one that, even though I didn't like it, I think is probably the most worthy is The Elephant Man.
No, we absolutely agree on that. That's the one to see.
Okay.
Our next movie is named Blue Velvet, and already this movie has caused a firestorm around the country, with some advanced reviews calling it a masterpiece and others calling it sick and depraved, and still others calling it a sick, depraved masterpiece. The movie takes place in a small town where a young couple stumbles over a mystery that begins with the discovery of a severed human ear and leads them to suspect that the ear might belong to the missing husband of a local nightclub singer. Here's the scene where the young couple, Kyle MacLachlan and Laura Dern, make a plan to spy on the older woman.
There are opportunities in life for gaining knowledge and experience. Sometimes it's necessary to take a risk. I got to thinking, I'll bet someone could learn a lot by getting into that woman's apartment. You know, sneak in, hide, and observe.
Sneak into her apartment?
Yeah.
Are you crazy? Jeffrey, she's possibly involved in murder.
In the movie's most shocking scene, the nightclub singer, played by Isabella Rossellini, discovers MacLachlan hiding in her apartment.
Who sent you here?
Nobody.
I've seen you before.
I sprayed your apartment. I took your key. I didn't mean to do anything except see you.
What did you see tonight? Tell me.
I saw you come in. I saw you talk on the phone.
And then?
You got undressed.
Do you sneak in girls' apartment to see them get undressed?
No, never before this.
Get undressed.
Well, that's a shocking development. Later, MacLachlan befriends her after he finds out Rossellini's husband and son have been kidnapped by a perverted drug addict who has made her his slave.
Who is this?
A friend. He's from the neighborhood. We were just talking.
Oh. You're from the neighborhood.
Yeah.
Your neighbor. Well, what's your name, neighbor?
Jeffrey.
He's a good kid, Frank.
Hey, you want to go for a ride?
No, thanks.
No, thanks. What does that mean?
I don't want to go.
Go where?
For a ride.
A ride. Well, that's a good idea. Okay, let's go. Let's go. Get your robe.
That's Dennis Hopper as the bad guy there. Blue Velvet is a movie that really challenges you to think about your reactions to it. And my reaction is, I think this movie is cruelly unfair to its actors. It was directed by David Lynch, the same man who made Eraserhead and Dune, and he's a talented director. You can see that here in scenes that have a lot of power. But he asked Isabella Rossellini in this movie to be undressed and humiliated on the screen, as few actresses ever have been, certainly in non-porno roles. And then he tries to take the edge off her shocking scenes by turning the whole thing into some kind of a joke. Well, either this material is funny, in which case you don't take advantage of your stars, or it isn't funny, in which case it shouldn't have so much campy and adolescent dialogue along with the really powerful sexual scenes. Sure, the movie's well made, but the more I thought about it, the less I liked it.
Well, I liked it, and I thought about it a lot, and I think you may be on the wrong tack in trying to feel sorry for Isabella Rossellini, because after all, she consented to do what she did on the screen, number one. Number two, I'm sure she's walking around wherever she lives, New York City or whatever, and survived the whole experience, just like Janet Leigh survived the shower scene in Psycho. So I don't think that that's pertinent. I think what's exciting about the film, and it is challenging, is it starts out with flowers and sunlight, and it's a happy little town, and then we dig deeper and we find out it's a nasty town, or at least a couple of people are nasty. And I sat there, and this did for me, and I used the Psycho example again, This did for me what Psycho did as a lot younger, which is eyes open and, oh my God, we're really getting in over our heads. And that's an experience which is challenging, shocking, but mesmerizing. And I like the picture.
Well, first of all, I don't think I'm on the wrong tack with Isabella Rossellini. In the first place, the movie was shot in 2 halves, so she had no idea, making her part of the movie, that all of the stuff outdoors and in the daylight was going to be smarmy and campy and funny with all kinds of in-jokes. And secondly, it seems to me that we can't divorce our reactions. It's not how Isabella Rossellini reacts to the fact that she's standing there nude and humiliated on the lawn of the police captain's house with lots of people watching. It's how I react. And that's painful to me, to see a woman treated like that, and I want to know that if I'm feeling that pain, it's for a reason that the movie has other than simply to cause pain to her.
Well, I think that the reason is that the film is a thriller and a shocker. I mean, there are people that get hurt badly in real life, and I think that this is a legitimate one. This is not a simple mad slasher movie.
Then why is it a comedy?
Because he wants to set you up. He's a director, and he wants to play you like all the directors, the great directors want to do. He wants to play you like a piano, which is have you smile and then swing you right into some depression.
Yeah, well, the next time that somebody wants to play me like a piano, he'd better get some music that's worth listening to.
I think this is a good song.
It's just shocking sometimes when things aren't the way you thought they were.
Laura Dern and Nicolas Cage are young lovers on the run in Wild at Heart, the new film from David Lynch of Blue Velvet and Twin Peaks fame. And this movie isn't easy to review because all my time as a critic, I've been rooting for the movies to be something more adventurous than just primetime TV programming, and Wild at Heart is certainly that. But at the same time, I think this picture is ultimately diminished by director Lynch trying to be too offbeat. At the center of the picture, a great, rowdy, passionate love story between 2 runaways, a girl named Lula, Laura Dern, and a romantic, tough guy named Sailor, who patterns his speech and manner after Elvis Presley. He's played by Nicolas Cage. The film opens with him killing a man brutally in self-defense. He goes to jail, gets out, and is met by Laura Dern.
Baby, I got a surprise for you.
Hey, my snakeskin jacket! Thanks, baby! Did I ever tell you that this here jacket represents a symbol of my individuality and my belief in personal freedom?
About 50,000 times. I got us a room at the Cape Pier, and guess what? Pyramid playing at the Hurricane.
Stabbing and steer.
When these 2 are alone together on the road, the film is magical. They do love each other in a theatrical way.
Peanut, I'm thinking of breaking parole and taking you out to Santa California. You up for that?
I'd go the far end of the world for you, baby. You know I would.
The supporting players in the story are all quite kinky. Out to kill Sailor is Lula's mother, played with venom by Diane Ladd. She asked detective boyfriend Harry Dean Stanton to go after Sailor. He objects.
Oh, now listen to me. You gotta get off that kick. As far as I know, Sailor was completely clean before he got involved in that event with Lula. And even there, he was trying to protect her. That crazy Bob Ray Lemon was coming at both of them with a knife, for God's sake. He could have killed both of them. You ought to be thanking him.
The hidden element there in that scene is that Diane Ladd there, Lula's mother, tried to put the make on Sailor. He turned her down. She wants him killed. But those scenes don't begin to describe both the inventiveness and the distasteful weirdness in Wild at Heart. David Lynch marries the style of a classic 2 characters on the road picture with a Wizard of Oz fable of hope. And that kind of ambition, that combination, that's all fun. But the back half of this movie is really littered with throwaway bits involving rape, flies on vomit, Fellini-esque nudity, a head blown off, cockroaches in underwear, and on and on. And the love story of Lula and Sailor, which is so strong, gets lost, I think, in this most ambitious movie that is, I think, diminished at the end.
You know, I've thought a lot about this movie since it won the Cannes Film Festival last May, which I totally disapproved of. And I think what bothers me the most about David Lynch is what I would call his only kidding syndrome. He wants to deal with the most shocking possible imagery. He wants to deal with subject matter that involves violence and images that are sure to absolutely repel the audience, and then he wants to always end with a punchline that's a joke. Now, right at the beginning of this movie, before we even know who any of the characters are, the Nicolas Cage character grabs a black guy who's trying to stab him and beats him to death and pounds his head against a marble floor over and over again with blood splattering all over him until the brain is crushed. And then, when we're sitting there absolutely appalled, not only by the violence, but also by the subtext of racial animosity, he staggers up against the wall, grabs a cigarette, lights it, and then looks up underneath his lowered eyes like this at Diane Ladd and gives an overblown melodramatic reading that's supposed to be funny, so we can all laugh. I hate it when Lynch tries to get off the hook of his violence by giving us those cornball laughs at the end of every one of those sequences like that.
Well, I'll tell you, the problem with me is I don't think there's any subtext of racism in that scene at all. I think that if a white killer had come to him with a knife, it would have been shot there.
Well, why was it a black killer then?
Why wasn't it white? I mean, it's the same question. We can play that one back and forth. He happened to be. But he was hired to do the job, probably needed the money. The point is, the other point that you're making is sort of somewhat what I'm saying. I like this picture more than you did. I'm more interested in whether you really like as much as I did the Sailor and Lula love story. I think that's a genuine, sort of beautiful relationship.
Well, yeah, and you can see it with Elvis Presley and any of his co-stars. Basically the same sort of thing.
Oh, this is...
Come on.
You don't think that was...
No, I didn't think it was a great romance. I thought it was recycled out of old movies.
I think that this picture is the strength of this picture, and the thing that makes me think that there's a lot more here than you're giving credit for, or maybe than I got even on 3 viewings of this film, is that it is recycled out of old pictures. I think this guy has put movie history in a blender, basically. And I think he loses control of the blender, if you will, at the end of the picture.
Yeah, well, the problem is, by the time he pours it out of the blender, all the froth has risen to the top. I wish he'd have the nerve to make the movie he wants to make instead of trying to sugarcoat it and all of this smarmy parody that he thinks will allow him to get away with what he really wants to say.
I think that he did it much better in Blue Velvet, a picture, again, we had a big disagreement on. I think that picture was more of a piece and more about itself than this picture, which, I keep repeating myself, he loses it at the end.
Patricia Arquette receives an envelope at her doorstep and thus begins the wild, confusing, moody, terribly violent, and I found rather meaningless David Lynch film called Lost Highway. As a critic, I'm all for seeing something I haven't seen before, and Lost Highway has that quality, but it also is a film that makes very little sense, to me at least, and so its violence pops out and seems empty-headed. Patricia Arquette also plays a mobster's girlfriend in the film. Characters and actors shift identities throughout the story, and here she makes serious eye contact with a young garage mechanic played by Balthazar Getty in front of her boyfriend played by Robert Loggia.
This magic moment, so different and so new, was like any other until I met you.
The kid's boss at the garage is played by Richard Pryor. It's great to see him in a film, any film, even this one.
Mr. Eddie called. Can I call him and tell him to come in?
Yeah, call him, tell him I'm back, and, you know.
The other key characters in the story are a devilish mystery man played by Robert Blake and a jazz musician played by Bill Pullman.
Where was it you think we met?
At your house, don't you remember? As a matter of fact, I'm there right now.
That's crazy, man.
Call me.
I told you I was here.
The story, I suppose, is a metaphor for these times in which people don't know who they are and are affected mostly by violence. That's the only interpretation I can come up with. David Lynch is a most creative filmmaker, has a fine visual sense, employs great musical scores, but I don't think Lost Highway adds up to much, and therefore its considerable violence really turned me off.
Boy, I feel just about the same way. You know, every time I see a David Lynch picture, I think to myself, this guy is so gifted that if he would only just break down and make a movie instead of being so clever all the time and trying to outsmart himself with basically what are sophomoric little plot devices, you know, stuff that
it would be very hard to make this convincing.
It doesn't pay off, it doesn't have a purpose, it seems contrived, it seems frustrating, and not to an end.
No, it just lays there, and again, I don't know if anybody could make heads or tails of this material.